The exchange. I'm afraid the news isn't good. How bad is it? Well, the cancer has returned and there are now several sites involved. I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but there's really nothing more that we can do. Cubicles still look the same. Same sterile off-white walls. Same diploma on the wall from the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And the same narrow examining bed that he was sitting on, covered with a piece of translucent paper that slid about slightly under his buttocks. The harsh fluorescent strips were still the same, the one in the right-hand fixture flickering slightly. Probably needed a new ballast. Well, how long have I got? Well, I'm afraid it's impossible to say. As you know, your condition is so rare, we don't have any stats on it. Based on the progression since I last saw you, I'd say about 3 months. But again, I have to tell you, it's only a guess. Could be more, could be less. Whatever happens, though, we'll make sure that you are kept comfortable. He'd essentially known what he was going to be told before he arrived, even though he had clung to that last shred of hope. Well, there's nothing more I can do for you. The doctor seemed keen to escape. His hand was already on the door handle. It can never be easy to be the angel of death when your professional role is supposed to be the bearer of healing tidings. No, Doc, thanks. Doctor left. Why do we play these games of social politeness, he wondered. I've just been given a death sentence and all I can say is thank you. He couldn't face going home just yet, having to go through it all with Jenna. So he went back to his office and sat quietly behind a locked door. Of course he'd known what was coming. It was exactly the same thing his dad had had. He was a teenager then, just about Peter's age. And Dad had been almost his own age now, just short of 42. He remembered those final 3 months with Dad getting thinner and thinner, changing almost day by day from a burly fellow in the prime of adulthood, still suiting up with the old-timers baseball team, into a shriveled old man, sallow skin, sunken eyes, stringy greying hair. Those last few weeks when he could no longer eat, only able to take water through a kid's sippy cup, barely able to speak. That was the future that he had to look forward to, such as it was. This was so unfair. 3 children at home, 13, 10 and 6, only moved into the house 18 months ago after struggling to scrape the down payment together. It was a fixer-upper. Every penny and every minute since had been put into making it more livable. There was still a huge amount to do. With the death sentence, it didn't seem likely that he was going to make a lot more progress. Jenna would more likely be pissed about what she was going to be left with than concerned about him. It started out so well. They'd met at university. Jenna, that's Genevieve, had been so outgoing. Wide smile, chestnut hair. He was captivated by her right from the start. When they'd taken an intro chemistry course together, she'd been assigned his lab partner. They'd been friends first and then started dating in 3rd year and married a couple of years after graduation. Later. How was your day? Asked Jenna. Okay, I guess, but there's something that we need to talk about after supper. Not another financial crisis, I hope. I saw that we got the bank statement today. I didn't see anything scary in it. Should I have? School wants a deposit for Peter's grade 8 trip by Friday. I think we'll have to get Sarah a new Girl Guide uniform. She's grown out of the one we bought last year. A little later. What's the matter? You've hardly touched your supper. I guess I'm not all that hungry. What do you mean I'm here at home all day, stuck at home? I make a decent supper and you can't be bothered to eat it? I suppose you went out to lunch with the guys from the office again. No, it's not that it isn't nice. I'm just not hungry. Later still. Jenna, could you put the TV off? I really do have something we need to talk about. What? Well, I went back to the doctor today. He had the results of the ultrasound and the other tests. The news wasn't good. What do you mean, not good? Well, the cancer's come back and it's spread. It's now all over the body, he says. It's the same thing that Dad had. Doc says I've probably only got about 3 months more to live. What the hell am I going to do if you're not here in 3 months? I've got 3 kids to look after. This house isn't paid for. It's not fixed up either. How am I going to do all that on my own? He felt too defeated to argue, closer to tears than to a sharp retort. He wondered when the signs of going downhill physically would begin to appear. So far, he felt just fine, except for a slight but nagging ache somewhere in his guts. The surgery had been a year ago by now. At that time, the surgeon was confident that we got it all. Oddly enough, he hadn't connected it with Dad till after the surgery. He supposed now it must have been obvious, but perhaps it was just a self-protection manoeuvre on his part. It was an emotional roller coaster. 2 weeks ago, his mood had been one of resignation. Perhaps it really wasn't resignation at all. Perhaps it was more like denial, because there was almost no symptoms then. But today was different. His appetite seemed to be all shot these past few days. His mouth seemed sore, and when he showered and shaved this morning, he thought he could see the first signs of jaundice in his skin. He felt not only miserable, but angry as well. Why should he have to have the sins of the father in the form of genetics visited upon him? Why indeed should his life be turning out so crappy? It wasn't even as if he was getting support from his family. Jenna had become completely self-centred. It was all very well for her to claim to be worried about the future, so she was worried. She at least had a future to look forward to. He needed a bit of TLC and there was no way he was getting it. Anyone remember those lines, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health? After what he'd become to think of as the bad news visit with his oncologist, he'd been called by the nurse to ask if he would consent to participating in a study of his condition. As his case was so very rare, he was asked if he would agree to twice-monthly checkups so that his oncologist from the teaching hospital could learn more about the disease, which there were fewer than a dozen known cases in the country at any time. So he had agreed. Today he had been for the checkup. Blood work, they'd monitor his liver function, urine sample, to assess kidney function, and to report physical parameters such as weight. He'd lost nearly 1 kilo over the past 2 weeks, which didn't exactly improve his state of mind. He thought wryly that he'd be following his own deterioration through the lens of the bi-weekly vital statistics. A very odd thing happened as he was leaving the oncologist's office. He was approached by a man he'd never seen before, a strange man wearing a fedora of all things. More peculiar still, the stranger addressed him by name. Without introducing himself, he said, "You're going to need me in the next few weeks. I'll be in touch with you." "Who are you and what do you want with me?" "Well, let me just say that you and I have business together. You're suffering from a terminal illness, and I may be able to intervene on your behalf." "Well, how do you know about that? What do you mean intervene? Anyway, who are you and what business is it of yours?" Questions, questions. Remember, I'll be in touch. With that, the man in the fedora walked away and crossed the street. This encounter left him feeling very unsettled. Who was the strange man? Even a few moments after he left, he couldn't remember anything about him. As if he was the man who never was. What did he want? How did the man know who he was? The man didn't seem connected with the hospital. Otherwise, surely, he would have presented him with a business card or some other means of ID. And since when do strangers approach people leaving the cancer clinic and tell them they may be able to intervene on their behalf? Was he some huckster for a snake oil treatment, preying on the faint hopes of people like him whose cases had been judged hopeless? He remembered scandals of people going to Mexico for treatments of Laetrile and other quack medicines. Was that who the guy was? And if so, why not come right out and say so? Perhaps he just wanted to bait the hook until things got more desperate. Well, you've come to the wrong place, Buster. I don't have any money for your schemes. I can hardly pay the mortgage. Or was it just a figment of his imagination? Had he really met a faceless man in a fedora? Was he starting to have hallucinations? Was his brain starting to show signs of debilitation? Was he going crazy as well as decaying physically? Were people going to say behind his back that the lights were on but no one was home? Later. One good, well, not quite so bad thing. Jenna seemed to have started to come to terms with the situation. At least the bad temper had subsided. She had not known him when Dad was ill, of course. Now there was at least an outward sense of compassion about her. She'd stopped bitching about her future and made an effort to feed him with calorie-rich foods to try to keep his weight up. Unfortunately, her initial outbursts when his condition was diagnosed had made the situation all too evident to the children. Peter had become withdrawn into himself. The girls were also having difficulty. Sarah was having behavioural problems at school. Patricia had even had a couple of bedwetting episodes, something that she'd grown out of more than 2 years previously. However, Jenna was not able to comprehend the depths of his despair or the times when his bottled-up anger caused him to keep his distance. He continued his twice-monthly visits to the oncology clinic, where, of course, the course of his physical decline was being duly recorded. There was no mistaking his physical decline by now. 5 more kilos had come off his frame, and the skin was now starting to look decidedly sallow. However, the man in the fedora had not reappeared, and the incident faded from his memory, recollected occasionally only as some kind of a trick of the mind. Nevertheless, all the spring had got out of his step, his purposeful stride having been replaced by a more sedentary pace, and now even the beginnings of a stoop and a shuffle. Shaving in the morning was the worst, having to watch day by day the image in the mirror, becoming increasingly disconnected from his own remembrance. He'd read that in the madness that is dementia, the caregivers for the old must often remove or cover up mirrors to protect their serified loved ones from the unfamiliar person who seems to stalk them about the house. It was all especially hard on Peter. Now in his 14th year, he understood all too clearly what was happening to his father. Following the outburst when he first told Jenna the news about his condition, being terminal, Peter had realised that his father's condition was an inherited one. Now as he watched his father's inexorable decline, Peter felt overcome with sadness and dread. A breaking point came for Peter the day that his mother decided that it was time to have a talk with him. They were alone in the house. His father and the girls had gone to the corner store to buy ice creams. "Peter, how much do you really know about your father's condition?" she asked. "Some, I guess." What does some mean?" "Well, he's going to die if that's what you mean." Peter stifled a sob. Jenna began to lose her composure too. "I just don't know what to do. Sometimes I feel so angry with your father, but I know it's not his fault." "Mum, you know, don't you, that I'm probably carrying the same thing?" "No, Peter, why on earth would you think that?" "Well, I've been doing some research on the internet. Even though it's very rare, they know that it's passed down from father to son, like Dad's own father gave it to him. And something else, everyone who has it has blue eyes. I've got blue eyes, but Sarah and Patty both have brown. I guess that clinches it, and..." No, Petey, just because you've got blue eyes..." "Well, it's true, isn't it?" he added challengingly. "I don't know, I've never heard of this blue-eyed thing before." "Well, how could I have a girlfriend knowing that? I mean, would you and Dad have got married and had the three of us if you and Dad had already known that he'd die like this? Jenna was silent. No, she was not at all sure that she would have gone through with marriage if she had known, and certainly not had children. I just don't know, she said at last. I suppose we just have to live each day as best we can. That's easy for you to say. I already know I'll be dead by the time I'm your age. No, Peter, you don't know that at all. You can't say that just because you've got blue eyes. But there was a pit of apprehension in her stomach as she said it. Some time later, there came the day that he'd been dreading. His condition was now considered palliative. He was certainly too weak in both mind and body to make any arrangements for himself, and social services had worked with Jenna to get him into hospice care. Peter had been told what hospice care involved. The girls hadn't, and it was impossible to know how much they really understood about their father's condition, even though its ravages were superficially obvious to everyone. It had been decided that they should move to the hospice while the children were still at school. He looked about his home, his mortgaged castle one final time, and recalled ironically the words of the confession from his childhood, things done and things left undone, the latter including the worn stair carpet and the redecoration of the entrance hallway. Perhaps the insurance money would be enough to pay for the renovations that he had not had time to complete. Then they got in the car. Jenna helped him down the front path and across the steps, then covered his legs with a blanket as they drove across town to the hospice. The room was tastefully decorated to look like home, with the walls papered in what is often called a Regency stripe. Only the hospital-style bed gave any indication that this was not the living room or bedroom in a family home. A bowl of fresh flowers stood on a round table, patterned drapes, a loving love seat and chair, a non-industrial broadloom completed the decorations. There were, however, no mirrors, thus sparing him the sight of that reflection, the man all before his time. The smell of dinner wafted appetisingly down the hall. Or at least it would have been appetising for those who had an appetite. Residents had an almost complete choice of what might tempt them to eat. Jenna went home to meet the children when they arrived back from school. They'd agreed that she would keep them at home that evening and bring them to the hospice tomorrow. You have a visitor, Tracy, the nurse assigned to his unit, mid-40s, cheerful, nice figure, though what did he care, poked her nose around the door. The visitor walked in, looked around, and hung his fedora on the small coat stand inside the door. I said I'd be in touch, he said, without any preliminaries. Are you real? Although the words were hard to produce. Yes, very much so, came the reply. I told you the last time we met that we might have some business to transact, he went on. I have a proposition for you. You can accept it or not. Whether it's Laetrile or some other garbage, you can forget it. It's too late for that now, even if I were interested. Just because I'm sick doesn't mean I'm stupid. No, it's nothing like that. I have a deal to put to you. Would you like to get out of this place? Yeah, in a box, it won't be long. Why are you jerking me about? Well, I can arrange for you to recover completely. That's the proposition. No Laetrile, no drugs. What can you do that the doctor can't? You don't need to know that. Just tell me if you're interested. Well, I'm listening. I don't have any other plans right now. You agree to certain conditions and you can walk out of here. Conditions? Yes, you have to agree to give up your old job and to take a job that will benefit humanity. Such as? Well, there's an opening right now with worldwide relief in their national office. You wouldn't even have to move. Well, what's the catch? Why would you want to do this? Let's just say it's like an exchange of souls. You wish that your life could be extended. There are other people in the world who do not want their lives prolonged and would like to do a good deed for someone else. If you like, they have signed their soul donor card. My organisations bring parties like those together. We just insist, however, that the person receiving the soul with unused time on it agrees to work for the betterment of humanity. Can I talk this over with someone, my wife, my priest? No, this one is your decision, yours alone. And by the way, but not waste too much time. Your soul has an expiry date on the arrangement with your body, only 2 days from now. Right now I can give you a deal for a soul with a good number of years unexpired on it. I'll be back tomorrow, so think it over. Remember, it's your decision. Wait. No, think it over. And with that, he retrieved his fedora from the stand and left the room. It made no sense at all what had just happened. But it was impossible to dismiss it as imagination or not to dwell on the conversation. An exchange of souls, like a soul donor card, seemed absurd. But suppose in some crazy otherworldly way it was real, what then? He'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing himself for death, making sure that all his affairs were in order, that Jenna knew what to do once he had gone, taking the time and emotional effort to say goodbye to his closest friends, checking with the HR department at work to make sure that everything was in place for his survivor benefit, not that he be the survivor. Now everything had the possibility, it seemed, of being turned upside down. Should he even entertain that possibility? Okay, let's suppose for a moment it was true. Now he'd finally come to terms with death, did he really want to go back? What would life be like as a modern-day Lazarus? Who were these people whose lives were so filled with ennui that they were prepared to let someone else live on in their place? And how long would this get out of jail free card last? 20 years? 30 years? Hope, it is said, is the most basic level of the human spirit. And so it was not long before the weeds of hope, straggly and unkempt, began to push their way through the neatly tended garden of unfinished business that he had assumed was his life. Suppose just for the heck of it that he would be able to walk out of here as a free man. It was actually very unsettling, especially at this moment he still had the body of a terminal patient. What would his life be like then? How would all those who'd said their goodbyes and begun their journey of emotional separation react to having to say hello again? It was impossible to sleep, torn between the knowledge that this might be his penultimate night and the inconceivable dream of regained vigour. What am I going to say to the family tomorrow? Should I lie back on the fluffed up pillows as desultory conversation played itself around him, no one knowing quite what to say or how long to stay? The children. Maybe the last time he would see them. These three who were the source of his limited immortality, walking into a future that he could not share. Or how about, oh, by the way, I had a visit from someone who seems to be offering me eternal life. No, I don't know who he was, but he seemed to be very persuasive. He told me I could trade in my time-limited soul-body connection because there are other people who don't want to take advantage of theirs. That would be a sure indication that his mind was as riddled with disease as his body. How could anyone make a decision like this, he wondered, even if Fedora Man was for real? He remembered the old adage, you can't cheat nature. Was Fedora Man offering him the gift of life? Was he proposing a devil's bargain to cheat nature and cheat God into the bargain? The first greyness of the pre-dawn was lightening the sky outside as he finally slipped into a troubled sleep in which angels and devils pursued him relentlessly with demands for judgments on every event of his past life, real or imagined, with Fedora Man mocking from the wings his indecision. Whose side was Fedora Man on, the angels or the devils? Later that day. It was done. Fedora Man returned, just as a golden sun settled on the hill outside his westward-facing window. He didn't ask the question directly about what had been decided. Instead, he said, "Enjoy that sunset. You'll not see another." All day long, ever since that emotionally fraught visit from the family, he'd been contemplating never seeing Jenna again. Likewise Peter, Sarah, Patricia, the house he'd worked so hard to provide. But in the final analysis, it was the sunset that made up his mind. Never again to see the sunset was more than he could bear. And so he made the decision in a moment in time, without actually thinking it through at all. Yes, I accept. The Fedora man looked at him shrewdly, nodded, and left without a word. So that was how it was to be, the most life-changing of life-changing decisions, completed without so much as a handshake. Surely a signature in blood would be the very least required. Now the big question. Was it all for real, or had it all been a charade? A cynical ploy by a misanthropic God to determine where his values actually lay. He certainly didn't feel like jumping out of bed. In fact, he felt physically just as bad as before Fedora Man's visit. Definitely no sense of Lazarus come out, ready to embrace by family, friends and rubberneckers, just like in the biblical account. Tracy came by to ask if there was anything he needed. "Do you want to watch a bit of TV, love, before you go to sleep?" she asked. Go to sleep, he thought. Is that like when you take the old dog to be put to sleep at the vet's? Jenna had promised to come and sit with him after the children were in bed, with Peter looking after the two girls. He knew it was really for the death watch. She'd probably stay all night, or as long as necessary. He might or might not be conscious by the time she arrived. Later. It was 03:19 according to the red LED figures on the bedside clock, the slow watches of the night when he woke. Jenna was stretched out on the love seat across from him, with the pinched look on her face of someone sleeping uncomfortably, like passengers in the economy section of a red-eye overnight flight. He was still alive, and the red figures flipped to 03:20 as he watched. There was an unfamiliar yet simultaneously familiar ache in his stomach. He felt hungry. Carefully, quietly, he crept out of bed so as not to disturb Jenna. Okay, he was pretty wobbly, but he was standing up unaided. Down the hallway to the kitchen, where he knew that there was little yogurts kept in the fridge. Finding a spoon, he ate 2 of them. "Are you okay? I wondered what had happened when I saw you weren't there." "Yes, I don't know how it happened, but I suddenly felt hungry. First time in ages." "Well, you'd better get back to bed. Here, let me pull the covers over you." Morning. Jenna stretched after dozing fitfully and uncomfortably. She looked across to her husband, who seemed to be still with a peaceful look on his face. "Oh my God," she said loud. In her thoughts she continued, "I was sleeping and I wasn't there to hold his hand when he died. How awful. I promised myself I'd be there at the end so that he wouldn't die alone." But then she noticed what seemed to be a rhythmic movement between the covers. He was still breathing, thank God. He opened his eyes to see Jenna looking at him, a look more loving on her face than he'd seen in a long time. "Hi. How are you feeling?" "You aren't going to believe this, but I feel much better. I think we can even tell Tracy that I'd like a bit of breakfast." Indeed, it was a miracle. He did feel better. Had Fedora Man been for real? It was impossible to comprehend. Was he really going to get more years, 20 or 30, as Fedora Man had promised? Or was this just a final bright period of remission before the end? He'd read that often the dying have a brief moment of lucidity and apparent recovery, just before the final slide into oblivion. Certainly wasn't time yet to tell Tracy and Jenna that he was doing a Lazarus. It might all be for nothing. So breakfast came. Fresh fruit, yogurt, soft bread roll, homemade jam, orange juice, Earl Grey tea. He ate and drank it all. Jenna's cell phone broke into the moment. "Mummy, it's Sarah. You've got to come home. There's something wrong with Petey. It's time for school and I just can't wake him up."